Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we have a mini Phalaenopsis orchid. The story behind this orchid is, well, basically it had been a while since I purchased any orchid and I came across this particular plant at my local grocery store. At first, I was only looking at it from a distance because it just looked like any other typical mini Phalaenopsis orchids with white flowers. And then I quickly realized its leaves has some mottling going on, some recessive markings. So I decided to spend a couple dollars. It might have been $5.99 or $6.99. And I decided to spend that money and bring it home. And that's what I did. I'm glad I did because this orchid has always been a reliable bloomer. And the care I provide to this orchid is no different than what I do for all my other orchids pretty much. So it's a very sturdy, low maintenance orchid. Granted, this orchid has a relatively good spot in my grow room, in my sunroom. It's in between the south and eastern facing window, so it's literally at the corner of these two windows. So it gets a little bit of sun from the eastern window in the morning, and then quite a bit of sun, indirect sun, from the south facing window in the afternoon. This orchid unfortunately is not fragrant. However, it's still beautiful in that, it's white petals. The flowers are completely white, and it's that pure white. It's not off-white or eggshell. No, it's like pure white. So under the sunlight, it always looks almost whimsical to me. So this orchid gets 25% fertilizer every single week when I do my watering for all my orchids weekly in the summertime, and then in the wintertime I scale back to only give them water every other week, and the water amount will go from quarter cup in the summer to 1/8 of a cup in the wintertime. And here is just to give you a sense of how vigorous this orchid was. It has a lot of aerial roots, which I love seeing, but at some point this orchid's aerial roots were taking up a lot of space, a lot of horizontal space. So later in the video you'll see that I finally decided to give this orchid a repot. In case you haven't noticed, most of my orchids are small/mini to mid-sized orchids, and I only have a few, less than 5 orchids that are regular or large size orchid, because I really don't want to have too many large size orchid because they take up so much space. As much as I love orchids, I refuse to live in an orchid jungle. So most of my orchids are small or smaller. And because most of them are small, and I noticed something interesting. Just because they're small doesn't mean they need less water. They can be thirsty too. In fact, if you look at this particular Phalaenopsis orchid, this mini, when it's in full bloom, the amount of bloom, the surface area of the bloom is very similar to the surface area of its leaves. So when my minis are in bloom, I usually try to give them a little bit more water than I typically give them when they're not in bloom, because I want to make sure they're well hydrated. Because oftentimes I really notice that they somewhat become more thirsty when they're in full bloom, which makes sense because they need to provide enough nutrients and water for the flower to open and to sustain, right? So for example, if I give this orchid usually 1/4 cup of water. Then usually after the watering, 3 to 4 days after, especially in summertime, I would try to give this orchid a little bit more water, maybe, you know, another 10 milligram, something like that, just to give it some extra 3-4 days after the watering, and then, you know, carry on with the typical watering routine. And here in the video, you see that little tiny leaf that fell off. That's totally okay. That's just very normal for orchids to retire its older leaves. That is a small leaf, and it was yellowing at a very slow speed. So I know it was just natural. It wasn't because this orchid is stressed or having any pest issues. I can't remember if this orchid actually gave me full bloom. I think the last bud eventually did not make it because, well, I think I didn't give it enough fertilizer, and also because I was moving it around to take photos, to make videos, so I think eventually that bud just didn't make it. And here is 1 month after all the blooms have gone away, and I decided to give it a repot. I only had to trim off a little bit of dead tissue from the roots. The rest looked really good. Basically, I took it under a faucet and just give it a good rinse to get rid of, you know, small pieces of sphagnum moss, but then also to wet the area roots so that it's easier for me to just kind of push them into the new container. And I also use the double cup method because this method has always worked really well for me in terms of keeping additional moisture, as well as using the outer cup as almost like a saucer, if you will, to collect water to allow this orchid to soak. But when it's done soaking, I would just take the inner cup up, take it out of the outer cup, and then, you know, let it drain and dump out the water. So it's very easy, and this outer cup is just for this orchid, so that way there is no or less possibility of cross-contamination if there's any virus or any disease that may carry over from other orchids. After the repot, I basically just let this orchid be for a week without water, without additional watering, because the roots were already wet and was getting water during the repot preparation process under the faucet. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!